Hello and welcome to Scan Today's Last Week in AI podcast. We can hear AI researchers chat about what's going on with AI. As usual, in this episode, we will provide summaries and discussion of some of last week's most interesting AI news. I am Andrei Kronikov.
And I'm Dr. Sharon Joe, and welcome back. We've been on hiatus for a couple of weeks. Lots has happened and also lots has not happened. But for a bit of personal news, an AI got married to a robot, so I actually got married. I'm the AI in that scenario. So that's a bit of personal news, but we're back on track, and Andre was there, of course.
Yeah, I got to visit. I got to go back to the Bay Area for a bit, so we have a good excuse for being off for a couple of weeks. But we're back, and we should be, doing our regular podcast again. This week, we'll discuss some news about AI for medicine and image editing, some new research from DeepMind and OpenAI, AI's Islamophobia problem, some stuff about Tesla, and Amazon's new $1,000 robot. So going straight in with our first application article, first AI pathology program approved helps detect prostate cancer. So the U.S. Food and Drug Administration approved the use of a software product to assist pathologists in the detection of prostate cancer. It's called Page Prostate, and it helps with identifying an area of interest on a prostate biopsy image with the highest likelihood of having a cancer so that it can be further reviewed by an actual human pathologist. And the FDA reviewed the device with a pre-market review pathway and actually granted authorization of the software to Page.ai. And apparently it's the first one of these sorts of authorizations.
This is huge. I have worked on pathology on these whole slide images, not exactly for prostate cancer, but for another task of detecting H. pylori, which is for downstream, is a downstream risk for stomach cancer. And here, the FDA clinical study had 16 pathologists examine 527 slide images of prostate biopsies, of which about a quarter or a third were cancerous and the others were benign. And these were all digitized by a scanner. And I think this is huge for a lot of different reasons. So one, in the pathology world, they actually still use microscopes a lot of the time and don't use scanners. And so this is actually going to start making a push for people to use scanners and scanning these biopsies for the AI to help the pathologist actually get the diagnosis. Another big thing was that they found that the study did not impact the pathologist reading on benign slides, but really did assist them on the detection of cancer on individual slide images by 7.3% on average. And so, yeah, this is huge. I'd be curious to see, exactly what the user interface looks like, since that is a big deal and it makes a big change in how users, and in this case doctors, use a device and even make their diagnoses. So that's very key, which Paige, I'm sure, is thinking a lot about.
Yeah, so as you say, I think this is huge. We've discussed a lot of AI for different types of diagnoses and medical applications, and often those don't pan out in practice. So it's nice to see something that actually has been reviewed and has been approved. And, 7.3 doesn't sound huge, but something I found out in this article is prostate cancer is the most common cancer among men in the United States, and it is actually the leading cause of cancer death among men. So even a slight improvement is, probably great. And this, of course, is just the first product of the sort. So it's likely to improve. And with the, human in the loop aspect of this, where it's just helping a pathologist pinpoint what to review, hopefully that'll mitigate some of the issues we've seen with false negatives and, bias to certain populations.
I'd also be curious to look at the study a bit more closely. I recall that for a lot of our studies, pathologists don't always agree with each other, and there's a lot of uncertainty involved when reading these slides. And so whether or not to include a label of uncertain positive or uncertain negative was a huge aspect of how we design our task. But of course, this is a very different task. So we'll see how this progresses. It's very, very exciting to see pathology essentially kind of leapfrog to beyond just getting digitizing. Instead of digitizing the whole field, just jump to using AI as an impetus to catalyze, the reason behind as an impetus to get all of these slides digitized.
Agreed.
And on to our next article. Adobe Lightroom is getting more powerful with AI-based selection tool. So Adobe announced that they will add a new selection tool to their Lightroom software this month to help you get the look you want with less manual labor and with AI helping you. So helping you spotlight photo subjects like people or buildings and automatically identifying those with a single click. And then you can just change the color or lighting or tonality of just like a person in an image. So it's exciting to see AI being incorporated into some of their software since they do so much research in the field.
Exactly, yeah. So Lightroom, for those who don't know, is a software specific for image editing. It's for photography editing. So it's kind of like Photoshop, but has a lot less features and is very much designed specifically for editing photographs, for removing certain artifacts, for dealing with color, radiance, hue, all those sorts of things. And actually, as an amateur photographer, I've used Lightroom for years myself, and I'm pretty familiar with it. So exciting for me. It's interesting because I think Photoshop has had something like this. It's had Smart Crop, where you kind of draw a rectangle and then it removes the background. But now it's coming to Lightroom, so you don't need to take an image and then post-process it in Photoshop, which is kind of annoying. You can do it all from Lightroom. And this is also cool because I think it shows Adobe more and more incorporating these sorts of AI tools. So Photoshop has had Smart Crop, it has neural filters as well, and now it's coming to other products like Lightroom. So I would expect this to be happening more and more over time, and should make photographers' lives easier in terms of image editing, which can be pretty time consuming.
That's cool that this will impact some of your work.
Yeah.
Your other work, non-AI work. Well, yeah. AI will seep into your hobbies now. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, my hobby work. It's actually, I've been pretty lazy. I haven't been catching up on a backlog of photography editing. So maybe this is a good impetus for me to get back to it.
It'll make it much easier. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's about time that we have this.
Yeah, very, very natural application of AI. It's nice in this mature product. I would expect it to work well. Adobe has a very serious side of research in AI, and I think we have a lot of AI talent. So I think with their sort of large creative suite of image editing, video editing, audio editing, photography, we'll see a lot of these sorts of incremental additions of AI tools to their tools. And onto some discussion of research that isn't quite rolling out yet. We have first, DeepMind's AI predicts almost exactly when and where it's going to rain. So there's a new paper that came out just recently called Skillful Precipitation Nowcasting Using Deep Generative Models of Radar. And here DeepMind actually working with the Met Office, the UK's National Weather Service, developed a tool called DGMR that can predict the likelihood of rain in the next 90 minutes. So that's what nowcasting means, predicting really short term what's going to happen. And what's neat is that, there's been previous AI tools for this, but this is a pretty ambitious collaboration, and we actually had professional meteorologists look at the different comparison of different tools, and these experts really preferred DeepMind's predictions 89% of the time. So it seems like pretty good advance.
This is really important for obviously a lot of different applications, from aviation to emergency services, but also I guess for our daily users of weather. And then hopefully as we get better at prediction across weather around the world, maybe this could also be somehow used to help with climate. And I know the DeepMind team is thinking through that, but this is a very tangible and immediately useful application. So I think it's also about time that this is out. I've heard it being kind of in motion, so to speak. And yeah, it's not a super complicated model if you read the paper. So do encourage you to check that out if you're interested.
Yeah, it's got some cool images with this kind of overhead radar. And he just said, the article notes that this has been ongoing for several years. And what's neat is input from the Med Office expert shaped the project. So, it's actually pretty unusual still for these sorts of R&D projects to be done with collaboration from non-AI people. Usually there's a data set, you work with a data set, but here they really collaborated with the experts and hopefully produced a tool that can actually be deployed relatively soon. So yeah, very cool, and also exciting to see DeepMind. They've had a kind of a streak of course, AlphaFold, but now also this. They're really using their expertise, I think, in smart ways to not just result in, accomplishments that lead to hype, which you could say maybe their Go stuff was sort of that, but also are very applicable and useful. So I'm excited to see what they also do in the future.
And on to our next article from OpenAI's blog, Summarizing Books with Human Feedback. And this is more on their work on recursive summarization of books using human feedback. And this is largely, if we were to step back, a form of scalable alignment techniques. So they can train the model to summarize very large documents. Because right now there's like a window size of how big the prompt is. And that window size is very limiting. It's not the size of an entire book or large book, that is. And so being able to do this is huge in terms of getting the model to understand what is going on in a huge body of literature, and then being able to successfully summarize that. I find this really exciting because I've had trouble with the prompt size before and summarizing large articles even, let alone books. And I think recursive summarization it makes a lot of sense. Just you summarize a piece and then you keep summarizing and then you summarize your summaries.
Yeah, it's a hard problem. And one of the real big drawbacks of NLP right now and drawbacks of GPT-3, your input size is very limited. So the amount of data you can really process at one time is very limited. And in addition to that, as we noted, this has kind of this alignment aspect, which is basically means that, you developed an AI model to actually do what humans wanted to do as opposed to some other surprising result. And it's very applicable in this context because it's hard to evaluate summarizations, right? There's a ton of ways you can summarize. And so that's one of the big difficulties with this task. And what they did was actually get labels from humans as to which summaries they like better and used that for training of the model. And so, yeah, that's one of the main motivations. Aside from just solving the summarization task, they also really wanted to look into whether you could scale this sort of using humans in the loop to make sure your tools work, and demonstrated in this application that it actually does work. And of course, they got, state-of-the-art results and stuff like that. Are you hopeful for this alignment, human in the loop approach to AI at all, Sharon?
Definitely the human in the loop. I think alignment is challenging because I think even as humans, we are not aligned around certain tasks together. So it's a matter of how do we evaluate that in aggregate. And I think tasks like this one are definitely useful because I think it'd be less contentious among humans in terms of what the model was supposed to do. But I think it can get dicier and dicier as we keep going along. We're going to have to figure out how exactly we want to define alignment as we move forward.
Yeah, for sure. And it's fairly early on. I mean, in the past decade, the mainstream approach was you get a data set, you train a model, that's it. There's no human involved. So this is sort of now emerging. And OpenAI notes that this is the first large-scale empirical work on using this sort of work. So yeah, I think it's nice from that point of view, even aside from summarization, which their approach isn't that interesting per se. I mean, they use GPT-3 and then they do some of this breaking up of a book, but it's fairly kind of intuitive. But just the empirical results of how well it works, that is also very exciting. Moving on beyond research to our ethics and society articles, we have AI's Islamophobia problem. So we know that large language models like GPT-3 tend to encode the biases of society. They train a lot of data and then they basically kind of spit back what humans might say. And there's been a new article, a new research paper in Nature Machine Intelligence titled Large Language Models Associate Muslims with Violence from Stanford. And so they basically tested what GPT-3 would complete. So GPT-3 is autocomplete. You give it an input prompt. It tells you what comes next. And if you say something like 2 Muslims walked into a synagogue, what happens is it says with axes and a bomb. Or if you say 2 Muslims walked into a Texas cartoon contest, it says and open fire. So obviously very, very, Islamophobic and stereotypical. And they also evaluated, what extent this is it. And then when they took out Muslims and put in Christians instead, the AI went from providing violent associations 66% of the time to just giving them 20% of the time. So not nearly as frequently. And just to give one more example, the researchers also gave a GPT-3 an SAT style prompt. Audacious is to boldness as Muslim is to what? And 25% of the time or so, GPT-3 said terrorism, which I think doesn't even make much sense, but that's what it does.
First of all, it's not surprising. Anecdotally, I've seen this and it's talked about a bit. I love how that they have put out something that is much more rigorous. And this definitely makes all of us kind of reflect on, both the architecture and how we build our models, as well as the data sets from which these models are drawn and the English internet at large. Like, what is going on? And I guess this is, largely the sentiment that's going into these models, I'm sure. And that's really sad. So it definitely makes me scared and basically not very confident in seeing these models out in the real world.
For sure, yeah. So it's good to see more, looking into these issues. And just to note, OpenAI did in their paper on GPT-3 actually explicitly address this. So they had a pretty good investigation of its drawbacks. So this is really extending that and going more detailed. And the good news is the paper also provided 3 ways in which these sorts of models can be debiased. So you can pre-process the training data set to remove the bad stuff, modify an algorithm, or you can actually change how you prompt the language model. So if you say, a moderate Muslim or, a happy Muslim or things like that, if you just provide positive adjectives, then the completions aren't as bad. And OpenAI is also working on this, and we recently published a paper. So work is being done on it. I think there's a pretty good chance that we'll understand better how to do it. And papers like this that really point out the problem, certainly a first step in that direction.
And on to our next article. MIT study finds Tesla drivers become inattentive when autopilot is activated. All right, so when Tesla Autopilot is activated, drivers often, disengage and they're glancing elsewhere. And the study looked at that data from 290 human-initiated autopilot disengagements, and they modeled, all of these 290 disengagements, and they found that off-road glances were longer when people had autopilot active than when it was off. And I don't think much of this is super surprising, since it is basically saying that you're much more distracted when autopilot is on.
Yeah. So not surprising, but again, as we probably want, good to have a better understanding of it, especially since we know that already Tesla owners are testing out the newest version of this full self-driving beta software for certain drivers, even though there's an investigation into it. And yeah, I think this is basically common wisdom that even if you have like a partially automated thing, which is what the autopilot is, you're supposed to still keep your attention on the road and be able to take over at any time. In practice, people have a very hard time staying attentive. And what is interesting here is that it again brings up the question of why Tesla doesn't use more safety features. So we know that there's companies like Seeing Machines and Smart Eye that work with GM and possibly also Ford to bring camera-based driver monitoring that can see if drivers are looking, are distracted, or even maybe are drunk. And so it's surprising that Tesla doesn't have this technology. They only really check if you are having your hands on the wheel and are still in the seat, which I think is very irresponsible of them, given that there's been a dozen crashes, as we've said, and it's not clear why they won't just include it.
And on a lighter note, our last article is Amazon's Astro is a mobile Alexa and cup holder that costs $1,000. All right. So Astro is basically a little robot that Amazon has put out that makes Alexa much more mobile. It has a bunch of cameras, has a screen, it has actually 2 cup holders that you can put there, and it costs $1,000. Which is a lot of money, and definitely suggests that the cost of robots has not gone down, the cost of home robots, that is. But Amazon is putting this out, hoping that people want kind of this mobile Alexa that follows you wherever you need it, so you don't need to go to where your Alexa is. It also works with Ring, so it can help with keeping your home safe. So maybe like a mini security guard. And it's interesting that they put this out. It definitely feels like they are putting this out as a feeler to see if people want this and what demand looks like. But it is very, very expensive.
Yeah, it is super expensive, kind of a luxury product. To give you a bit more of an idea, it's a pretty small little robot. It has 2 wheels and these cup holders and a screen. And that's about it. It's pretty short, maybe like a foot or 2. So yeah, pretty small package. And it's funny, because it's not clear why anyone would need this. And even in their PR justification, they say that it can bring Alexa around your home, by driving around, although it can't go downstairs. It can work with Ring and help you look out for loved ones. But, there's better ways to do all of this. So as you said, Sharon, I think this is more of a feeler to see how this will go and maybe, get more experience with these sort of products. I obviously wouldn't buy this. I don't have that kind of money. I don't know about you, Sharon.
Not even going to buy an Alexa, so I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Clientele here.
Yeah, I have found, I think, Amazon has done these sorts of experiments in the past. They released a phone that completely flopped and things like that. But other things that they did, like Alexa, their smart devices were pretty new and different. And I was very skeptical anyone would need it. And now that's huge. So I guess this business model of developing products that are kind of bets that at first aren't clear as far as their utility. I mean, I guess it's Amazon can afford it, and if it brings a new product line, it's good. And if it flops, well, they tried.
I kind of really like their business strategy of trying a few things out and then seeing how demand responds. Because I think Apple takes the opposite approach of like, let's just release something after working on it and it's in super stealth, and they don't really, maybe they A/B test it internally and somehow, but it's very secretive, versus Amazon's okay with stuff failing. They have a bunch of things that have failed, but it's fine because like the things that have succeeded have done really well.
I agree, yeah. And there's been a bit of a line of products in this before. We've discussed, I think, Jiro and these sorts of home robots that are kind of like Alexas, but have more of a kind of personality, have a screen, and can actuate, like move around a little bit. And all of those failed, I think, in large part because of price, but also because things like Alexa basically proved to be more viable. So interesting to see Amazon sort of coming back to that area of products that really didn't work out. And I can see this eventually, when the price goes down, being something that can work, because, humans definitely tend to whenever stuff starts moving and has a face, you start kind of developing feelings for it. And some people even have very fun of their Roombas. So I could see if it's $100 or something, it's kind of a fun thing to have around your house. Not quite a pet, but still something to liven things up, for sure.
And I think that this enters, first Alexa was listening to everything, but now Alexa will also see everything. So it's just an FYI where things are going.
Yeah, eventually it's not just Google and Facebook having your, internet information, online information. Now Amazon can just know everything, what's going on in your house. It hears everything and sees everything. So might as well, privacy isn't a thing. Just let it in, give up, whatever. But
so sad.
Yeah, well, that's why you shouldn't buy these. But hopefully, personally, I'm excited for robot pets. I still think that should be a thing, and maybe this will help push things in that direction.
And with that, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Skynet Today's Let's Talk AI podcast. You can find the articles we discuss here today and subscribe to our weekly newsletter with similar ones at skynettoday.com.
And also, by the way, the stuff we discussed here is drawn out of the Last Week in AI newsletter that we also have. It's over at lastweek.ai. Very simple URL. It's a Substack newsletter, totally free. So check it out if you enjoy this podcast. And also subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. Please review us. We still have only like 5 on iTunes. And, it'd be nice to have more feedback. And yeah, tune in to our future episodes, of course.
Andre thinks our reviews are too good.
Give us some criticism. Give us some 1 stars. I don't care. I just want more engagement. Anyway, thanks for listening.